I now invite onto stage our keynote speaker this morning, Rachel Finn, who's Head of Irish Operations and Director of Data Protection and Cyber Risk Services at Trilateral Research Limited. Welcome along, Rachel.
Point it over there, yeah. Into the corner. Okay, super. Hello? Yeah? Okay, brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much. It's really nice to see so many fresh faces here at 9 a.m. I have to say, when I saw the schedule, I was a little bit nervous because I thought all these, it's like teaching a class at 9 a.m. at university. You sort of like, you know that half the students are going to be asleep and the other half are going to be doing something else. So I'm really glad to see all of you fresh, awake, and interested faces this morning. I'm going to be talking about SocioTech methods for developing sustainable and responsible AI systems. As Michael mentioned, I'm the head of Irish operations for a company called Trilateral Research, and I also run the Data Protection and Cyber Risk Service. But I'm a social scientist by background, and so that really informs, the sort of work that we're doing, the sort of work that I'm doing, but also the sort of work that we're doing in the company as well. So Trilateral Research, what we do is we develop technology to help save lives. And I know that that sounds really dramatic, but I hope that by the end of the talk I'll convince you that we are actually making a strong, sustainable contribution to the area of using technology to help save lives. What we do is we build ethical AI solutions to tackle the most complex social problems. That includes social problems like tackling child exploitation, addressing modern slavery and human trafficking, addressing climate change, helping to support in crisis and disasters, and things like that. And what we really specialize in, we have 15 years experience on research and consulting practice on privacy, data protection, and ethics. And so we really are specialists in the most sensitive data that is being processed by all of us as a society. And so we bring that to our ethical AI and technology tools. So why ethical AI? I think actually probably everyone in the room is already convinced about this, but one of the things that really strikes me is that we've been talking about the potential harms that can arise from AI since we've been talking about AI, so since the 1950s. And one of the communities that I was really heavily involved in when I was an academic was the surveillance studies community. And it really emerged how important it was to ensure that we weren't just critiquing technology from the outside and saying things like, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that. But what we really need to do is to be part of the solution. We need to use things like privacy by design, ethics by design, et cetera, to ensure that we're part of ensuring that these technologies work in the ways that we want them to. So Trilateral Research, again, for the last 15 years, has been working alongside all these other very famous names to call for this kind of ethical approach to building technology tools. Again, I'm a social scientist by background, and it's always been really important to me that we see technology as a tool. It is a tool that reflects and reinforces our social values. And we have the power to drive which social values we want our technology tools to reflect and reinforce. We don't have to sit passively and wait for them to reinforce the worst qualities within our societies. The other thing I should say as well is that I'm going to use the term AI, but what I really mean is I mean AI is an umbrella term that encompasses all different types of data processing, from things like unsupervised machine learning through to kind of more straightforward data analytics and data visualization, especially when I talk about our tools. So how do you build ethical AI? For Trilateral, it's very much about a SocioTech approach. So I'm going to use one of our tools that we've developed as an example to kind of take you through what this looks like in practice instead of talking about it at a very theoretical level. So I think there are plenty of people that are saying things like, well, we need to integrate privacy, but how do you do that? What does that mean in practice? How do you do it when you're sitting around the design table? So the story that I'm going to tell you is a story that inspired one of our products. We were talking to police forces in the UK, and we discovered a real gap in the market. So when you talk about protecting children from exploitation, there's a real lack of data sharing within the safeguarding partnerships that are charged by law to do this kind of work. So consider that you have a young woman named Samantha Smith, okay? She's 15 years old, and she is arrested by an officer, we'll call him Officer Bloggs, in the company of a 23-year-old man for trespassing. What the police know, but Samantha doesn't, is that this 23-year-old man has a history of being accused of sexual assault. But they're arrested for trespassing. They're not really doing anything wrong. They're just traipsing around an old warehouse. And, the police get called. They arrest both of them. Because of her age and because of the relative, minor nature of the offense, they book her, but she gets let off with a caution. And that's fine. On the other side of town is Child Protective Services. And they know that Samantha is in her third foster home in 2 years, and she's run away twice because she doesn't get along with the foster family, okay? Now, Social Services doesn't know that she was arrested last night in the company of this concerning adult male, and the police don't know that she is in this situation at home. And as a society, the way that we charge protective services with managing the potential risk to Samantha is that each of these agencies waits until their monthly meeting on the 23rd of May, and we hope that one of them is concerned enough about Samantha Smith to ask the other one if they have any information on her. And that's how we as a society are safeguarding children on the ground right now. And so we felt that this was a significant cause for concern, and we wanted to work with the safeguarding partnerships to improve this situation. So, the problem that we were working with is that, the police and the public sector organizations are still relying on spreadsheets and paper documents to assess children's vulnerability to exploitation. And at present, this process is reactive, it's inefficient, it's legally complex, and the result is genuine failures for young people like Samantha Smith. What we're really working on is the fact that neither the police nor Child Protective Services have a single view of their own data, nor do they have a single view of the combined data set that they both hold. And again, this has been a really difficult and a really entrenched problem because of all the ethical issues and all the data protection issues associated with sharing and processing this data. So, Trilateral Research takes a SocioTech approach to managing these kinds of situations. And I'm not going to say too much about this slide because I'm going to go in depth into some of the specific elements as I go through the talk. But the idea really is that the ethical AI builds trust in the use and adoption of AI and confidence in the insights that can be derived so that it becomes a tool that we can trust that, as I said, reflects the societal values that we want it to reflect. So SocioTech, shockingly, combines social science and technology. And we've turned it into a structured approach for managing this ethical decision-making through the whole stage of the product development life cycle. So that includes things like looking at the user needs in the context of operations, through to data protection and cybersecurity assessment, explainable AI and AI bias audits, as well as the kind of machine learning governance and validation. And for us, everything is context-specific and ongoing. We look at the input data, we look at the associated processing, and we look at the outputs as well. So first step is co-design. And co-design means two different things for us. The first is that we work very closely with end users in a shared responsibility model. Both the product developers and the end users have a responsibility to ensure that the way that the product is developed and the outputs that it produces are ethical and are respectful of privacy, data protection, and other human rights. So the end users are part of our design team from the get-go. But internally within the organization, we also build interdisciplinary co-design teams as well. So the designers include subject matter experts, sector experts and end users, as I already mentioned, social scientists, lawyers, data protection experts, ethicists, human rights experts, and then all of the technology folks, the data scientists, the data engineers, and the software engineers. And everyone is invited to participate in the requirements definition. So all of the people in that list get to submit questions and requirements to the product management committee and have those considered alongside all of the technical requirements as well. And this required a lot of work. It required a lot of actually language translation. We had to teach the non-technical experts to speak tech. Because it's all well and good if you're the DPO of an organization and you say, well, you really have to consider subject access rights as you build this tool. That doesn't mean anything to tech people, right? So we had to get those folks to translate as the that into design thinking speak. As the data protection officer of the organization, I need to be able to pull all of the data about Rachel Finn from the system in order to answer a subject access request. We had to teach them to speak like that and to frame the features and functionalities in that way. We also had to teach the product teams to speak police. We had to teach them to understand what exactly is meaningful. What are meaningful outputs to the officers who are going to be looking at this system, or the safeguarding professionals who are going to be looking at this system, and make sure that it speaks to them. And then finally, we had to teach the end users, the police in this case, sufficient data literacy to understand what the tool was telling them. They needed, in the shared responsibility model, they needed to be active users of the system, and they needed to be literate enough to understand what it was telling them and what it wasn't telling them as well. So for each product, we also build an ethics framework that's specific to that product and specific to the context in which it is going to be used. We look at the potential input data, we look at the application of the tool, and we look at the potential impacts of using the tool for people on the ground from a human rights perspective. So we don't just think about the end users, we think about the broader population whose data is being processed as well. So we look at, I think the context part of it is really, really important. I did quite a lot of work on drones, a couple years ago when that was something we were all concerned about. And one of the things I always told people is that you can use exactly the same drone with exactly the same components and exactly the same capabilities for a slightly different purpose, and your risk profile changes completely, right? If you go from infrastructure inspection of a cell phone tower to taking real estate pictures, your risk profile is completely different, even though you're using the same tool. And that's why context is so important. So we use this ethics framework through the whole product lifecycle in relation to building the tool, deploying the tool, and also continually assessing the solution. Another essential step was dealing with data protection. So as I was saying to you, another one of the hats I wear is I'm head of Trilateral's Data Protection and Cyber Risk Service. And we're very lucky that work that we have done, we have such a long history doing that work, that we have an entire consulting practice dedicated to providing data protection compliance support. We do that for organizations in Ireland, in the UK, and also across Europe. And whenever we walk into a room, whenever our product teams walk into a room and suggest sharing and processing data in a different way, someone in the room goes, oh my God, we can't do that because of GDPR. Right? It happens every single time. And so we're very lucky to be able to bring in someone who does this every day, well, multiple someones, but we only bring one to each meeting. We're able to bring in someone that does this every single day and can talk them through the process of making this work. So what we do is we help them to identify the legal basis. Are you legally allowed to do what we're suggesting that you do? We look at the legislation, we look at their processing activities, etc., and we walk them through the process of identifying that legal basis if it's there. If it's not there, we stop. We discuss the data thoroughly. We discuss the reason why it was collected, how it was collected, and the different purposes for which it might be used. And we look at whether that meshes with what we're proposing to do with the tool. We assess the feasibility, and We then, once we're all happy, we can write a position paper for them that they can take to their legal teams and get that checked. And once we're all happy, then we proceed with the project. We take them through the process of writing a data protection impact assessment, developing a privacy notice so that everyone knows what they're doing with the data, and also building data sharing agreements that make the sharing and combining and processing of this data robust and legal. And that's also very important as well. And then finally, we develop a training program for the end users, again, shared responsibility model, to ensure that they know what they can and cannot do with the tool. The GDPR includes purpose limitation. You can only process this data for the purpose for which you originally collected it. You can't process it for other purposes. So you can't enable function creep. You have to make sure that you maintain that purpose limitation. And this step is essential. No project that processes data about people happens unless you do all of this work in the background. Another thing that we had to do is identify and tackle bias in the data set. Okay, so we used our own internal explainable AI tools to interrogate the data set and to build different versions of the model that had different levels of complexity. And so we had to ensure that the model that we developed did not reflect and reinforce the bias that already existed in the historical data. So as an example of this, one of the things so when we think about child exploitation, I think a lot of us think about sexual exploitation. But actually there are many forms of child exploitation. Coercing or forcing someone to buy or sell drugs is a form of child exploitation. Coercing or forcing someone to join a gang is a form of child exploitation. And the safeguarding partnerships take that very holistic view of child exploitation. And so as a result, there are not very many young women who are referred to the safeguarding partnerships because it is focused on many other activities alongside sexual exploitation. And those that are referred to the safeguarding partnerships are often victims of some sort of sexual abuse. And so when we tried to simplify the model, we found that the experience of sexual violence was becoming a proxy for gender, which is not something that obviously we wanted to reinforce. However, if we allowed the model to be more complex, that meant it was more difficult for the end users to understand the outputs. And so we had to leave it more complex, but concurrently we had to work really hard on the training program to ensure that it was detailed enough to ensure that the end users could really interpret and understand what the tool was telling them and what it wasn't telling them. So it was sort of an if-then relationship. Finally, in terms of methods, I tried to pick 3 or 4 things so that it didn't go on for too long. Promoting human decision-making. Again, this is really important. Microsoft actually have been talking about this lately as well as AI co-pilots, that the end users are actually co-pilots for any AI tool. And we've been working on this for quite a few years. So what we did was first we looked at how to visually present the algorithmic outputs such that we were building data literacy among the safeguarding partners. So we did real social science research. We did ABC testing even, not just A/B testing, but ABC testing to ensure that we understood that when we presented it this way, this is how it was read. When we presented it this way, this is how it was read, et cetera, et cetera. And we chose to present the output specifically in a way that encouraged the end users to think about what they were seeing. We tried to make it less obvious than it could have been to force them to think about it. Because what we really wanted to do was to discourage that kind of threshold bias, whereby if something's red and it's a 70, I have to do something. But if it's yellow and a 69, I don't, And so we wanted them to ensure that when they looked at it, they weren't making those kinds of false distinguishing it in that kind of false way. So again, the training materials were really important here because we had to support them to understand what the model said, what it didn't say, and how they should be interpreting and using the system. Okay, so what does ethical AI look like? That's how we built it. Now let's have a look and see what it actually looks like. Cesium. So what we built was a product called Cesium. Cesium is a tool that transforms this multi-agency decision-making to protect children who are vulnerable to exploitation. And we do this by leveraging individual data sets and combining those data sets, as I already mentioned. We're really proud of the fact that we've achieved AWS qualified software status for this, and so it is a very robust and highly functional tool. What the tool does, first and foremost, is for the first time ever, it gives police and other safeguarding professionals a single view of children's data, both individual children's data and also the whole population of children for which they have responsibility. They can see the top 5% of most vulnerable children within their population of responsibility for the very first time. And this, we were able to give them a 34% increase in the number of children in that most vulnerable category. And what and this was so powerful. As we did some of the validation exercises, we took them through each of the individual children on the list. And by the end of it, when we were finished, one of the partners in the room got up from her chair and said, "Excuse me, I'm very sorry, but I feel like I have to leave and make some phone calls." And she made phone calls about all of the children that were on that list now that they hadn't previously had on their own list of the most at-risk children. You can see here on the right-hand column that we don't give a risk score. The idea is not, we suggest children's priority for further risk assessment. We don't give risk scores. And it is really the job of the safeguarding professionals to use their professional judgment to do the risk assessment themselves. All we do is show them the data and give them a suggested priority score. And that's part of what I was talking about in terms of making them think about the algorithmic outputs. The second thing that we were able to do, and this is really a very nice story about SocioTech in action, actually. We were able for the first time map children's connections to convicted criminals to assess their vulnerability. So this is what I was talking about in terms of understanding who Samantha Smith was arrested with. Some of you may know what the Cambridge Crime Harm Index is. It is an index that ranks the severity, it provides a numerical display of the severity of a crime based on how many days a person convicted of that crime spends in jail. And so we were able, each person, if they have a criminal record, for each person on this list, if they have a criminal record, we leverage this Cambridge Crime Harm Index to give them a score in terms of their potential risk to that child. And so you can see here that Samantha Smith, she's in the middle, she's number 15 in yellow, and she's connected to Nathaniel. This is who she was arrested with. Nathaniel himself is quite a concerning individual, and Nathaniel is also connected to quite a few concerning individuals as well. And so again, it doesn't say to do anything. All it does is simply suggest some cause for concern and suggest where this person's vulnerability may look like. Okay. Now this is a part where it's very important for me to say that this is pure data visualization and regular analytics. It's not AI. The tech team were very forthright about that. So again, for the first time ever, we can combine these multiple data sets, and the police and the safeguarding professionals can see what's happening with the child and what's changing over time. So you can see that in relation to arrests, in relation to missing incidents, in relation to mental health support needs, this person's needs profile is certainly changing over time. And we can see that this is a person whose needs are increasing rather than decreasing. Again, we don't say what that means. We simply say, this is the information that might be useful for you to think about this. And then finally, we support, but we do not replace professional judgment. So these algorithmic transparency tools and explainable AI mechanisms really make this into a decision support tool. It does not make automated decisions itself. And so what we do is we tell the police and the safeguarding professionals which variables contribute to the child's vulnerability and how much. We don't tell them what to do, we simply say, this is how their vulnerability profile appears based on the data that we have. And so what we have is we have this sort of ethics without compromise. We've got this secure, legal, cloud-based data sharing. We've got a significant operational efficiency improvement for these professionals, which is the equivalent of 4 extra staff members for these safeguarding partners. We're able to identify children at risk months before traditional assessments, and we've given them this 34% increase in visibility of the most vulnerable children. So we're done, right? We've built this really great ethical AI tool, and we're all finished. We designed it with the end users, we designed it with the ethicists, we put all the features and functionalities in. We must be done at this point, and we are not. There are ongoing challenges, and we need to leverage the shared responsibility model to ensure that we meet these. First is we need to maintain model performance over time. The model is trained on historical data. We need to ensure that new data is integrated into the system on an ongoing basis to enable the algorithm to continue to learn. So we need to regularly retrain and update the model. We need to know if new bias elements are appearing in the data set or in the model in the way that the model is processing the data. And so we have to do regular bias audits and assessments to ensure that we're capturing that. And we need to ensure that we integrate the updated data. We also have to address the changing regulatory landscape. You know, the AI Act is coming soon, very soon. The UK has an algorithmic transparency standard. There are many new pieces of legislation in the US, and we have to make sure that we stay on top of that, both trilateral in terms of the folks who develop the model and the end users, because they're the ones deploying it. We also have to maintain end-user algorithmic literacy. We know that any training really only lasts 6 months, okay? And then you need a refresher course to remind you of the baseline lessons. We also have to account for staff turnover, so there will be new people using the system that weren't using it 6 months ago when we ran the last training session. We have to invest in that, and the end user has to invest in that. And then finally, we have to maintain data protection and cybersecurity protections. Again, on our side as the developers, but also on their side as well in terms of their own use of the system. And so, just to conclude, I think you heard me say the word investment 5 or 6 times on the last slide. I think it's really been clear to us throughout this journey that if we want to be serious about ethical AI, we have to invest. We have to invest in the ethics side alongside investing in the tech side. And we need a commitment from government to enable that, from industry, from civil society organizations, and educational institutions. But we actually need commitment from customers as well. We need customers to continue to demand that we treat their data respectfully, lawfully, and in line with the values that upon which we have agreed as a society. We, Trilateral, are continuing to invest in this. We've got a research project called Transcend that is looking at bringing these methods and tools forward to enable us to continue to innovate in this space. But we need others to invest in it as well. And I think I'm probably preaching to the converted because everyone in this room is certainly interested in ethical AI. And what we've really learned is that doing the right thing isn't easy. You know, it takes discipline, it takes commitment, it takes hard work, and it takes all of those things every day. That's the kind of work that we're doing at Trilateral. That's the kind of work that we're doing with our partners, and we would love for you to join us in that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rachel. We have time for some questions now for Rachel. We have a roaming mic as well if anyone would like to ask any questions. Question down here. 2 questions over there. Perfect.
Hi, thanks very much for a great talk. Particularly interested in how you control for bias. I mean, you know, so for example, you know, you gave the example there of how you use kind of the harm index. You know, how do you control, say, for things like bias in sentencing, you know, for particular cohorts of individuals? Do you have mechanisms for kind of compensating for that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So where we're using the crime harm index, We are relying on the rigorous academic approach of the folks who developed that index to ensure that the bias has been accounted for in theirs. But as we work with our own tools, it's really about continually interrogating the data set, continually interrogating the models, and leveraging our own internal experts who are themselves staying up to date on all of the debates and developments within the criminology field to ensure that they bring those lessons to our technical teams all the time on a rolling basis. And so it's about making sure that you're having that constant conversation. We only know what we know, we don't know what we don't know, right? And so as researchers uncover more and more of these kinds of biases and these kind of problematic issues within different types of data sets, we're able to integrate that on a rolling basis as we learn about them. And that's where that continuous investment really comes in.
Thanks very much, Rachel. I'd basically the same question. You mentioned at the start data bias audit. So how do you audit data for bias, please?
Well, we have an established methodology for doing that, and it's based on some of the forthcoming legal requirements in terms of what is expected from these data bias audits. And so you're able to look at the original data set, look at the eventual selection criteria, and do impact measurements in terms of what the potential bias, how the selected categories align with the proportionality of the original data set. I'll be honest, that's not my area of expertise in terms of how that math actually works, but we do have established methods within it. Secondly, we're constantly interrogating the data set ourselves, as we said. I mean, we're very lucky to have such a high-level interdisciplinary team within the organization that we're able to ask the right questions, we hope, and ensure to the best of our ability that we're making good decisions. I think it's important that we're doing this work to the best of our ability rather than being so, and then monitoring the bias, rather than being in a position where we're not doing the work because we're concerned about potential bias. I think it's better to do it as responsibly as you possibly can and keep an eye on things than to not do it, because you can see what the benefits of combining those data sets are. We just have to keep working on it. I think there's someone in the back there.
Thanks for a great talk, Rachel. I'm just wondering, how do you account for bad actors within the system? In the UK police force, there's been a lot of issues around domestic and sexual violence.
Yeah, I think that's where the shared responsibility model really comes into it. We do as much training as we possibly can, and we involve the end users in designing the tool. They themselves know what their own internal biases are, they know what their own internal problems are, and so we work with them on a regular basis to ensure that we're being very clear about what you can and cannot use the tool for. It also includes an audit log, so you can always look back and see what the tool was used for and by whom, so that if you have a question or a concern about something, that can be investigated and addressed. But again, it's about internal policies and procedures in terms of how the tool is used. And as an external organization, we have limited control over that. We know we have limited control over that. And so we think carefully about the features and functionalities to ensure that, we're keeping that purpose limitation firmly in mind and not enabling the tool to do other things just because it's possible.
Question there?
Yeah, back there.
Behind?
Back, last row there.
So, do you ever worry that you might be giving the police force a list of potential future offenders by showing them individuals that are currently high risk? Because eventually they'd see some form of correlation, and that, the intent might not be to abuse it at the moment, but it could be seen in the future, even because the tool will be handled by individuals.
I think that it's important to understand that we're not giving them data that they didn't have.
Okay.
The police have this data. They're not leveraging it in order to fulfill their statutory responsibility to protect children at risk. That's what we're focused on. That's what the Safeguarding Partnership is focused on. In terms of access to the tool and the data that it has, an important part of implementation is ensuring that you have access profiles and accessibility profiles built in to the system on their side, that only the right people have access to this system, and they're only using it for the purpose for which it was intended. So all these people exist already in police databases. We're not giving them any new data. We're simply combining it in a way that enables them to understand how at risk this child is. And that is their statutory responsibility in this context. I think it's important that we think about the fact that, AI is just another technology, it's just another tool. We have plenty of concerning technologies and tools in society that we have made the effort to govern appropriately and effectively. Thinking about things like nuclear weapons, for example. Yes, there was a period of time where we were all worried that someone would just hit the button, but we govern that effectively and responsibly. And again, I think that's where we talk about the commitment required. We need that commitment from government and from industry to ensure that we do govern these tools effectively and responsibly to ensure things like that don't happen.
Right.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, if anyone has one. Is there one here?
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks, Rachel. That was great. I really enjoyed that. And it looks like you're way ahead of the curve, but you did mention the imminent EU AI Act. Mm-hmm. And I just wondered, have you done the work already, or what else do you need to do to get ready for that?
We've done quite a bit of the work already in terms of what is currently existing in the current draft, which changes frequently. It doesn't change by much, but it does change frequently. And so yes, we're taking all of those things into account. And that's what I was saying before. We're building bias audit tools. We're building risk assessment tools. There's quite a few drafts out there of what frameworks could look like in order to address these kind of AI risks. And so we're working directly with those. We've been involved in working with the European Commission and some of the working groups in terms of outlining what should and should not be in that legislation, from a research perspective and from a policy research perspective. And so we're quite familiar with it, and really it's about keeping abreast of it. And then once we have a final text, then we'll be ready to kind of really launch. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much again, Rachel.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.